Let's face it, business can be tough sometimes. There's always a pressure to perform, to succeed, to produce. So when you come across a person who combines a keen business acumen and incredible energy with an inspirational touch, you want to keep them close. Dawn Airey is exactly that kind of person and executive, and the loyalty and affection that she inspires is a testament to those qualities. Dawn joined me on the podcast to talk about her early days at ITV, the definitive stints at Channel 5, the move to Sky, and Channel 4 past and present. Enjoy. Hi Dawn, welcome to the pod.
Thank you very much, Danny. Lovely to hear you and see you.
Marvellous. Well, I always like to start with a fun question just to get the creative juices flowing. So my question to you is this. You were asked by a big global media organization to launch one of three channels for them. It could be a football channel. It could be a film channel.
Mm-hmm. Or it could be pornography.
Or a family entertainment channel.
Phew.
And you're sort of associated with all of those in different forms. Football, because you're very much involved in the women's FA and women's game right now, and film channels because you've had a long association with general entertainment, and family entertainment. You started out in family entertainment. So which one would you choose?
Well, that's a really fun question and a difficult one to answer. And I don't normally do the either or. I do that and I try and launch all three. But at this moment in time, because of the explosion of interest in women's sport, and because of, I think, football in particular, there's an unprecedented interest in the game, both in terms of engagement, in terms of playing, in terms of audiences and money. I think it would have to be the football. Very
good. If somebody offered me the same choice, I would pick the same choice. So I wholeheartedly.
I'd happily do all three. Launching channels is the most magical thing.
Were you a big TV fan growing up? When did you decide that was going to be a career choice for you?
I was always interested in storytelling, and I was sort of classic, probably young girl. There were two things that I thought I would do. One was probably go into journalism, or I wanted to be a vet. Now, lots of young girls say I want to be a vet, but I really did want to be a vet. However, there was something called physics that slightly eluded me at school. And I was told you had to get straight A's in all of your sciences. And I knew I wouldn't get a straight A in physics. So I had to park that. But that's okay, because I was very interested in storytelling and being a journalist. And I sort of thought television, news and current affairs, that will be a place to go. So really, it wasn't until my probably 14, 15, when I started really seriously thinking that going into television would be an option. I also should add that I was an angry young girl. I wanted to tell stories. I went to a boys' public school. I had the socialist worker delivered to me there. I was sort of Citizen Smith on a soapbox. And I thought television, and indeed it still is, unbelievably powerful for communicating. So not surprising that when it came to post-university, the choices that I made led me to television.
And that was Central TV.
Yes, fantastic.
A regional ITV franchise. I mean, ITV was very regional then.
Yeah, it was. And it was fantastic. I mean, I'll confess during, I'm sure, the course of this conversation about many failures, of which I have a lot, a few successes, but I have some failures. And when I was graduating, I was pretty confident I was going to get onto the BBC training scheme, had some interviews and was told it was a very, very high standard that year I applied. And I didn't get in. And I hadn't applied for anything else because I thought I would get in. And because I didn't, I thought, I better apply to ITV. So I just fired off my details to a whole host of the big five regional ITV companies. And Central was the first to respond. And I went through a series of interviews and actually ended up being a general trainee at Central Television. There were three of us in the 80s. And it was just simply wonderful. I had the most wonderful boss, the late Andy Allen, who truly was a television great and visionary, a brilliant man, and a nurturer of all sorts of talent. And the studios were thriving. But I mean, Central was the biggest 7-day contractor, and we had studios in Birmingham and Nottingham, and there was just so much production. I mean, it was absolutely teeming. Price is Right, blockbusters, $64,000, Question, Boone, Morse, there was Spitting Image, and so it was glory days, really. And also because advertising, there wasn't the competition that there is now, and it was literally that old sort of, I think it was Lord Thompson said it was a license to print money. It absolutely was, and it was wonderful. It was absolutely wonderful, but it was also incredibly creative, an incredibly creative time for television. And ITV was then thriving, albeit I think there were 13 or 15 regional ITV companies at the time.
And how competitive were they with each other?
Insanely competitive. Now, I used to attend something called network planners meetings. So I started off as a trainee, went into production, but Andy Allen, my boss, said, actually, you should be a planner because you're always saying you're interested in the audience and you're interested in how programming is scheduled, so you get good inheritance, what's going on in the opportunity. I think you should do that. And he made me a planner. I was very young. I was in, I don't know, my mid-20s, and that was unheard of because most of the big planners had taken decades to get to that position. And suddenly the affront of Central, they put this young and female shock horror woman into these network committees. And what it gave me was insight into the horse trading that went on, but also the competitive nature. And the competitive nature was driven just out of big personalities, but it was also because it was big money. And so you had London Weekend and Thames. Obviously, LWT had the weekend franchise. Thames had the weekday. London Weekend's director of the programmes was Greg. Thames's at the time, I think, was David Elstein. Then you had John Fairley at Yorkshire. You had Steve Morrison at Granada. You had Andy at Central. Big personalities. And they all wanted to win. They all wanted their shows on air. They all wanted the inheritance from Coronation Street or the inheritance from the Bill. So there was a massive amount of horse trading. But you wouldn't believe it today. I mean, it was probably... it was more like a trading floor than it was a creative controllers meeting.
And then the ITV Centre came along and you became part of that.
I went in as controller of kids and daytime. I have to say, I was very happy at Central. I didn't want to leave Central. I thought I'd be at Central until my television career was over. I really, truly loved it. But Andy Allen said, no, you need to move on, and I'm not going anywhere, and my job is the natural one for you to get. So you need to go and do this, and you're going to learn a lot. And actually pushed me out of my comfort zone, which was a very, very good thing to do. And I was the only female, and I was pretty successful. And there was a certain amount of, and you could argue that this was, again, a bit of a hallmark of my career, a certain amount of sort of raised eyebrows and outrage. Well, wait there. How come this woman is controller of kids? She's never commissioned a kids program in her life. And daytime, and I had been involved in something called the daytime subgroup. So I knew a lot, I had a bit of sort of industry credibility around daytime, part of the team that commissioned this morning. But there was skepticism, but very quickly, kids and daytime became very successful. And it's not surprising because you're not horse trading. You look at the schedule, things that work, you give longer runs to. You try lots of new things. And if you try lots of new things, you're going to get some things that work. And very quickly, Children's ITV that was being stuffed by Children's BBC, we started to get ahead of them in the ratings. So the numbers spoke for themselves, so the detractors could go away, and daytime was doing well. But actually, I would argue it would be impossible not to do a good job if you go from a collective commissioning and scheduling to an individual. So very successful doing that role. And as a result of that, I got plucked over to Channel 4.
So that was in 1994. How would you characterise Channel 4 at that particular moment?
Well, it was unbelievably creative. I mean, it was, and it had this wonderful remit and it was out there. It was a bit elitist as well, even though it still had that diversity that Jeremy Isaacs sort of brought in, different sort of commissioning editors, so who didn't have experience of broadcasting, but had good judgment in areas that they were specialists in. So David Rose from theatre and Amy Sargent in terms of education. But it felt for me, it was Channel 4, but it's also a bit of me. I felt like a little bit of imposter syndrome coming in. And I took over from the late, great Andrea Wamfer as controller of arts and entertainment. And I had big personalities working for me. So I had Valdemar Janacek, who was controller of arts, who was certainly very provocative and didn't think much of my appointment, but we sorted things out between each other. And Seamus Cassidy was in control of entertainment. Mari MacDonald, who you might remember, Danny, in charge of film acquisition. And John Willis was the director of programs, who I know was just an extraordinarily brilliant tastemaker and allowed us to take risks. Now, Michael Grade was the chief executive, so he got rightly a good chunk of the credit for Channel 4. But John Willis was the director of programs, and he challenged us to do brave things and to do different things. And I would say it was a sort of heyday for Channel 4.
You came back in December 2021 and joined the board, and then you were interim chair. Was it an emotional homecoming? And did you sense, or could you see the differences from up close from having been there previously?
Well, it was the most peculiar thing. And when you say, gosh, it was 27 years on, I mean, you think, bloody hell, where did time go? And I think we all think that. And then I think, I have packed a lot of jobs into my so-called career, or, I call it a list of assignments that I've been given. I was thrilled to be invited on the board. To be honest, I didn't think that I would get onto it, but it was suggested that I should apply. So I applied and interviewed and did. But I went into a building that was it was like, I know exactly where I am. And it's the same, but different. It's, as we say, altogether different, Channel 4. What is the same is sort of the remit is essentially the same, to champion unheard voices, to super serve youth because they're not served by other PSBs. It's always going to be a little bit the outsider, because that was its remit. But I think it's grown up from when I was there because of the competition. When I was there, Channel 5 didn't even exist. There are only 4 terrestrial channels, and you look at the world we're now in and the world in which Channel 4 is competing. And I think what Channel 4 has done has been remarkably adept at interpreting the remit for its time, but remaining true to its core and actually being very successful. And it's diversified and is diversifying its revenues pretty well in terms of super serving the audience outside of the linear environment. So, it felt comforting to come back, lovely to come back, familiar to come back, a privilege to come back, but also excited by the future. And, and Alex Mahan and her team they're all a class act and remain ambitious for the channel, but they're very grown up and they're very analytical in a way that we never were. So, certainly when I was there.
How did the move to Channel 5 come about, and what was the brief?
I remember getting a phone call from Greg saying, we're launching this, we're making a bid for this we've got some spectrums available. And Greg said, how do you fancy being director of programs? And I said, well, I'm actually very happy at Channel 4, thank you very much. And he said, well, I think you should do it, you'd be good at it. And this is an anecdote that isn't there, and I haven't shared this. He said, I'll give you 25 grand. I said, what do you mean give me 25 grand? He said, I'll give you 25 grand if we can use your name in the envelope for bidding for the license. I said, what? Just for using my name? He said, yeah. He said, but if we get it and you don't come, you have to pay our 25 grand back. So I thought, that's an easy way of earning 25 grand, isn't it, in the 90s? And also, it happened to coincide, I lived in a chapel and all our stained glass windows were leaking and they needed to be taken out and re-leaded. And you know what? It was going to cost 15 grand, which is what that 25 grand would have been after tax. So I thought, that's great. So, okay, count me in. Didn't expect that they would win. And then I got a phone call, we got it, are you coming? But I was really happy at Channel 4. I thought, Christ, I don't know. And I remember talking to Michael Grade about it. He said, no, you don't want to go and do that. So whoever goes in first time round or balls it up, go in second time round and gain all the glory. And I said, I'm not so sure about that. And if you're going to do it, I'll try and think it's going to be successful. And I thought about it for not very long because actually I didn't have the money to give back to Greg. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And that's how it came about, not just because of stained glass windows, but it was the opportunity to launch the last free-to-air terrestrial channel was sort of irresistible because nobody else is going to have that opportunity, and few people have had that opportunity in their lifetime to launch ITV, to launch BBC, to launch Channel 5. So I said, okay, count me in. And then, of course, there was a license application that won the bid. And the license application, it was very academic. It was very heavy PSB. You would think we were going to be BBC One, but it was written to pass an exam. And of course, it passed the exam, but it wasn't a piece of broadcast. It wasn't a viable channel because we'd committed to all of those classic PSB things. arts in Pete, loads of religion, news and current affairs, a whole swathe of stuff that actually the audience they've got that already. And how can we compete with ITV and BBC and Channel 4? Because actually we've got a fraction of anybody else's money. We've got to retune a third of the nation's video recorders so that if they watch us back on playback, we don't bugger up their televisions because they won't be able to watch the other channels. We have this major sort of civil exercise to do. And I've got a license application that is good academically, but is useless practically. How the hell are we going to navigate our way through that? But we did. And, Channel 5 then was, much derided, really. But we knew we had to be different or better than existing channels. So we went down both of those tracks. And we very quickly worked out what our voice was, make it very, very, very easy to navigate, but make it light and contemporary and fun. And that's what we did. We had a fraction of anybody else's money. And I lay bare to the critics of Channel 5 to say, you try and launch something on the £60 million programme budget that I had and grow the channel from 0 to just under 6% share in less than 4 years and be valued at $1 billion. That was successful. It was successful because we knew who our audience was, and it was a younger, most definitely a younger sort of mid-mainstream audience, and it worked. They liked Night Fever. They liked Jack Doherty. They liked some, Sex and Shopping. They liked the Red Shoe Diaries. There was nothing. What we put out then was sort of, it's laughable now compared to some of the things that you can see on broadcast telly. But we were sort of rather regarded as alcoholics and a lock-in in odd bins, that we were off our head. We were out of control. We weren't. We were very, very, very considered, very analytical, and we worked out what worked and what didn't. And it's very easy to say, oh, well, Dawn said the famous quote. But of course, the famous quote would be less famous if it was quoted correctly, which what I said was when Janine Gibson asked me at the Ivy, which was our canteen, our local restaurant. So summarise Channel 5. I said, very simple. Some would say Channel 5 is only about films, because we had a film every time, 9 o'clock. Football, because we were very opportunistic in terms of buying football matches. And the F word. I won't use it on your podcast out of respect, but everyone knows what it is. But the channel is about a lot more. But of course, some would say, it's about a lot more. It's chief executive says, Channel 4 is about films, football, and everything. It's too easy a quote. So, that would be probably my epitaph, it's all right distilling stuff down to, alliteration, but it was so much more sophisticated than that. And also there were great executives that came in and, are still rattling around the industry. And Channel 5 was a hard gig. A lot of people have gone into 5 and struggled. One of the great tragedies, or two great tragedies of Channel 5, one was the sale of Channel 5 when I went back for the second time to get it back to growth. And I stripped out a lot of costs and just got it back to growth. But unfortunately, the timing was spectacularly bad. Channel 5 had sort of lost its way a bit when I'd left. And sort of Gerhard convinced me to go back. He said, you're the heart and soul of this place. Go back and work your magic and get it back on track. Now, it's not me, it's a whole team of people that get things back on track. But unfortunately, there was that awful economic downturn and ad revenues plummeted in 2009. And Channel 5, which was owned then completely by RTL, wanted to get rid of all of its break-even stroke loss-making businesses, and Channel 5 had just gone into break-even. So we were sold. I would have never have gone back, to be very clear, to have the business sold 2 years later. And it was sold, so it was sold to Richard Desmond. And Richard, I'll give him credit where credit is due, which was he knows when to buy companies at the right time. He did. And when he bought the company, he got a lot of the programming that had been sold to us from Fremantle at renegotiated prices. So he had a lower base. I'd also stripped out the best part of £70 million the year before he took over the business. Then the ad market in 2010, when it was predicted to be down sort of double digits, was up 13%. So he bought it cheap. It had onerous contracts that had been renegotiated and reduced, so his program budget was there. So he made away like a bandit. Now, that isn't to say that he didn't also cleverly bundle and sell it into his other media assets. He did. But RTL, who'd been such a patient and such a good shareholder for so long, sold it at the wrong moment in time. But there we are. So a bit of a history, maybe a bit too long, of my beloved Channel 5, because I did love it. And when you create something, I mean, it is like a little bit like a child to me. And it was the most wonderful of times. I mean, there were just a great bunch of people I worked with. So, there was Jeff, there was Ashley Hill, there was Tim Garden. I mean, Alan Nixon, I mean, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful people. And Nick Milligan, and the late, great, divine Nick Milligan. We did something against all odds and were very successful and very happy at doing it, and created a very special culture.
So in between those stints at Channel 5, there was the period at Sky. And what was the big attraction to move across to Sky? And culturally, I guess it was quite different from what you'd been used to.
Too right. So why did I leave 5 and go to Sky? Really quite simple, which was, at the time, 5 was owned by United Business Media, so Clive Hollick's business, and RTL. And I mean, the channel was successful, good audience share. And there's always a time in one's career where your currency is very high, which it was, off the undoubted success of 5, the recognized success of 5. But also there was a bit of a frustration, because RTL wanted to put more money in. United Business Media were more resistant because they wanted to exit the business and they wanted RTL to buy them. So it was a bit of a standoff. And I thought, I don't want to be involved. I don't really. It's probably time to go. And at the time, I was approached by both ITV and Sky. And ITV would have been the natural place for me to go back home. ITV I do regard very much as sort of homing pigeon. That's where I started. Wouldn't be great to go back there as director of programs. But at the same time, I was approached by Sky. Now, part of me thinks, well, did Sky really want me, or did they just not want Channel 5 to grow as much? I thought if we take her out. But I was intrigued by Sky. I mean, I didn't really understand or appreciate the economics of the business behind satellite television. So I thought, well, that would be a good thing, I think, to learn, because multi-channel is the way of the world. And I'd always been intrigued by News Corp and what they were doing. And it made me feel uncomfortable about even thinking about going to Sky, because it did have this very macho, high performance culture. Now, I don't object to high performance cultures at all, but I was conscious that sort of women seemed to be sort of spat out there. And, it was Tony Ball was the chief executive at the time. So I was slightly nervous, but I do like to challenge myself and I do like to learn. And I thought, I'm probably going to learn an immense amount over there. And so I had conversations with Tony, and he said, look, we've got these wholly owned channels. And then it was Sky News, it was Sky One, we launched 3 music channels when I was there. I know I was in charge of ad sales as well, and I brought Nick Milligan over from Channel 5 to head up advertising. And so I thought I took the plunge and went over, and it was a bit of a shock. And I remember somebody saying to me, said, you've done something that most men would never do. And I said, what? I don't quite understand that. And they said, you've gone from being chief executive now to, albeit you're very senior, but you're not the boss. And I thought, that's interesting. And it did, I have to say, take a little while to realize that actually, Tony Ball called all the shots. I mean, you had to persuade him, but I was brought in to grow the channels, to give Sky, I think, a bit more respectability and credibility at the time. We got more money to spend on original content. And, we were cute in how we spent that money. And we also did some pretty good acquisitions as well. We got 24 off the BBC. I remember Sophie and I think one of the things, that we have that we would like on a channel, 24 would be great. And we got that, and we then went after, it was Lost, and your old company, but you weren't selling them at the time. Lost and Housewives.
As Disney.
Sorry, no, yeah, Des, forgive me.
If only.
Yeah,
God,
I
if
know.
only.
If only. And we got, we got one of those. So we went on a bit of a spree, and we launched new channels, and my career grew there. I ended up running third-party channels as well. Also, so pretty much everything in terms of content, apart from sport, of course. And it was interesting and sort of and happy days. Tony Ball left after a year, and then James Murdoch came in, and I liked James. James was, he was 30 at the time, and unbelievably smart and very challenging. But I sort of realized, and I'd been there just, I think, my fourth year, that I probably wasn't going to go any further than I was. And there was a world exploding around sort of independent production companies and other opportunities. Maybe now is the time to try something different. So I joined a company called iStar. I could do a masterclass on joining companies that you realize it's what you're joining is not what you were sold, and the company had to go into administration, and I was in and out in 10 days. And that was 10 days. I learned more about wrongful trading in 10 days than I want to in a lifetime, but there we are.
But it's interesting looking at Sky now in a world where the BBC may be ending up in a subscription type environment. Sky is now very active in producing original content. There could be a time when the Sky lineup is not that dramatically different from a BBC lineup in a subscription-driven world. Do you think that's a possibility?
Well, I suppose if you look at the breadth of what it does, from sort of Sky News to Sky Arts, I mean, it is sort of amazing that BBC have allowed Sky really to own the art space, which I think is what it does with Sky Arts versus the BBC. And Sky News, I think, is a spectacular service. And then what it's doing in drama, massive budgets, some really, really, world class drama. So, I mean, I think what Sky has done incredibly well is super serve the customer, have the must-watch television you have to have, which is sport, and then diversifying away from sport a bit. Clearly, live sports, you're always going to pay a premium for that. It's always going to be unifying and a sort of silver bullet. But behind that, to have a breadth and depth of content, that if you don't want sport, you're going to have to get Sky, because you're so locked in with all of this other content, as well as, of course, it providing your broadband and all your telephony needs and God knows what else into the home. It's just been a very, 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 I think it's an unbelievable company, how it's sort of, how it's grown and developed and nurtured and has done it through being an outsider. It started off being an outsider, whereas now, and Sky would never want to be described as this, it is sort of establishment. Who would have thought that it potentially could and is, and I don't think it judges itself relative to the BBC, but it provides a full range of content of the highest possible quality. Yeah, it's stunning. It's a stunning service.
We touched on RTL, and RTL at the moment are going through a process of bringing together some of its channels in different territories, like in France with one of its major competitors, and the same in the Netherlands. So it's very interesting that you're seeing that evolution and that consolidation in linear broadcast. Is that something you think will end up happening here in the UK?
I have no idea. I'm not going to interpret. It's a good question. Channel 4 board member says yes, maybe. What does that mean for Channel 4 when it's up for sale? I'm not going to respond to that. What I would say about RTL is RTL has a huge, huge, huge benefit. It's owned by Bertelsmann, a private company, a private family, and they take a long-term view about things. And they are very strategic. They're incredibly smart. And Thomas Rabe, who's the chief executive and has been, for well over a decade, and was very senior for a previous decade, really understands that business. And so, and he's also been clever in terms of diversifying revenue. So there's a lot of revenues they've got coming in now from their digital exploitation of the broadcast and production assets that they have. So I think they will have probably taken just a very pragmatic point of view, which is thinking, well, linear broadcasting, and I don't know. I mean, by the way, this is pure speculation. I genuinely don't know, but I do know they will have taken a very, very, very thoughtful, and it will be analysed by folks whose brains the size of this planet, that says, you know what, the linear broadcasters, consolidate. It's fine. It's absolutely fine. And we get a lot of synergies and savings and potential leverage in the market out of that, because we are competing against all sorts of global players for advertising. So can that model be extrapolated to the UK? Well, potentially yes, it could. Will it? I have absolutely no idea. I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going down that rabbit hole, but good try.
Very good. Well, look, just to finish up, I always ask my guests for their lockdown film, TV, music choice and box set. What would be your choices?
Well, I'll tell you what I did during lockdown, because lockdown for me was excruciating, because I fell and broke nine bones. So not only was I in lockdown, but I bloody well I could barely move. But there we are. And it didn't involve alcohol, the result of the nine bones broken. I just fell very, very badly. So I can tell you what I did. So, I've got young kids. So we watched a load of movies, but of course nothing could be more than a 12 certificate, sort of being a good parent, even though they loved things like Bridesmaids and the funniest show. But we went back to the Marvel films actually, and we watched all the Spider-Man movies, which our franchise is just brilliant entertainment. So we did that, and then on the box sets, I took the advice of a friend on Facebook who said, you have to watch The Bureau. And I thought, another French subtitle series. It is one of my top all-time favourite dramas, in my top 3. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's unbelievably brilliant, because it's so close to the truth, and these are characters that you invest in, and the twists and turns of that spy in the contemporary world, I thought was just brilliant, and there's lashings of them. So there was that. Now, in terms of books, the truth is I couldn't concentrate for too long, but I have a missus who started to write novels. So her second novel was called Same But Different, which was about alternative families in West London. So I read that. And music, I love the 70s and 80s. And, to be honest, I'm trying to get my kids enthused about Bowie, Supertramp, Sex Pistols. They're not, but I always go back to my 70s and 80s compilations. But there are. That's dating me terribly, Danny, but it's the truth.
Oh, it's fantastic. I would love to be at a disco or some kind of music venue where they play Supertramp followed by Bowie and the Sex Pistols. What a combination. Well, Dawn, Airey, thank you so much for being on the podcast. It's been brilliant. I think there have been times when the moniker Scary Airey has been applied to you, but that has absolutely not been the case. It's been an absolute joy, and wish you all luck with your future endeavours.
Thank you very much, Danny, and thank you for the pod listeners listening to this.